This is Speaking Freely, and I'm Floyd Abrams. It's good to be back with you. We're going to talk today about a really interesting case, which was very, very hotly controverted, which many members of the public were very well informed about because it was covered from beginning to end. And people watched it, had strong views about it, indeed still have strong views about it. I'm really glad to have with us today Angenette Levy, who covered the case from beginning to end, who knows it well, and on whom I'm going to be leaning as we talk about what happened in the case. I'm here because it became a lawsuit, a libel lawsuit. And the libel lawsuit led to a decision by a judge, which is really very interesting and is an application of the rule that I've often talked to you about, set forth in the great case of New York Times against Sullivan, which basically says that if a public figure, and in particular, a public employee, brings a libel suit, he or she has a really tough burden to win the suit. Not only has to prove that what was said wasn't true, that it was false, but that it was either known to be false or that it was printed or published or shown, in this case, with a high degree of awareness of its probable falsity. I won't tell you what happened yet in the court, except to say that I'd like to begin by just giving you a sense of what the case was about, what the documentary, the series of documentaries called Making a Murderer was about, and how this all wound up in court in the first place. So, may I turn to you now to have you talk to us about just what happened in court and your reaction to it in 5 minutes.
Well, thank you for having me. This is a case I did cover from beginning to end. It started on Halloween Day in 2005 when a young woman named Teresa Hallbuck, who was a freelance photographer, went to the salvage yard owned by the family of a man named Steven Avery. Steven Avery was a man who had gained a lot of notoriety in Northeast Wisconsin and really throughout the state because he was the first person to be exonerated of a wrongful conviction, a rape conviction, using DNA evidence in the state of Wisconsin. So he became a celebrity of sorts and a poster boy for the Wisconsin Innocence Project. Fast forward a few days to November 3rd of 2005. Teresa, her family hasn't seen her in several days. They can't get a hold of her. They're worried. So they call the sheriff's office where they live in Calumet County, Wisconsin. They report her missing. They find out, the police do through some investigation, that one of her last stops on the day she went missing was at the home of Steven Avery. He had placed an ad in the Auto Trader magazine and requested that a photographer come out and take a picture of the vehicle. And this is something Teresa did to make extra money on Mondays. She would go out and take these photographs. A news alert is sent out, missing woman. We need help finding her. Her friends start going around looking for her. And then 2 days later, on November 5th, her cousin went to the salvage yard. It's a huge 40-acre property. And basically asked the brother of Steven Avery, "Can I search your salvage yard? I just want to make sure her vehicle isn't here." Well, poof, she goes straight down this walkway into this 40-acre salvage yard, finds Teresa's vehicle kind of hidden by car parts and tree parts, a huge search. Law enforcement descends. Over several days, they say they find evidence, including her burned, unrecognizable remains, which were later determined to be Teresa Hallbuck's, in a burn pit behind Steven Avery's garage. He is taken into custody and charged. charged. He says, I'm being framed. The cops planted evidence. If they found any evidence, it's all planted, because he was suing the county where he lived, Manitowoc County, which was the neighboring county to Calumet County where Teresa lived. He said he was innocent. He didn't murder her. He believes he's being framed because of the lawsuit. Calumet County was prosecuting this basically because there was a conflict of interest with Manitowoc County handling the case. It goes to trial. In the meantime, his 16-year-old nephew is arrested and charged with assisting with the rape and murder of Teresa Hallbuck. He goes to trial separately. At trial, he claims, I was framed. These Manitowoc County Sheriff's deputies, who were supposed to only be assisting in the case, found evidence, including a key to Teresa Hallbuck's RAV4 in my bedroom with my DNA on it, but it's all planted. They had the key. They put my DNA on it because they had my DNA because of the wrongful rape conviction. He goes to trial.
And that
Colborn,
was central to the
Andrew
case.
Colborn, who found the key, testifies, as does Lieutenant James Lank, and he's convicted of the murder. And then it turns into a huge docuseries on Netflix.
Right. And a very popular one, right?
Very popular, yes.
What did you attend the whole trial?
Yes, I was
Yeah,
there every
every
day.
day.
I covered this case for 5.5 years. Can you believe? I mean, it's insane that I covered it that long.
And did people from the sheriff's office testify?
Yes, Sergeant Colborn and Lieutenant James Lank from the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office both testified at the trial, as did another sheriff's deputy, Detective Dave Remaker, and some others. So they were assisting. They, in my opinion, shouldn't have been there at all, but they were assisting Calumet County with the investigation and were brought in to help search areas of the property for evidence.
Right. Now, in the case, and in the opinion that I've read, uh, uh, the libel case was brought by Sergeant Coburn.
Correct.
What was the thrust of his testimony at the trial?
Well, he was cast as one of the bad guys, obviously, by the defense, Steven Avery's defense attorneys in this case. And he was put on the stand by the state. They called him to testify, and they were indignant, of course. The prosecution was that anyone would accuse a law enforcement officer of planting evidence. And that was the accusation in this case, that they not only planted his, DNA, but they planted his blood in her vehicle. Sergeant Coburn said, we were searching the bedroom and we were just searching. And one of the bookcases or this nightstand shook. And, I turned around. Lieutenant Link said, there's a key. And I looked and there's a key. There's a key by a slipper. And it turns out to be the key to Teresa Hallbuck's vehicle. He was adamant that he didn't plant any evidence. As was Lieutenant Lank, and there weren't a lot of direct questions by the defense about whether or not they indeed did plant the evidence. And they said, look, we didn't, really go there that much because he's not going to admit it on the stand. There won't be a Perry Mason moment. But they kind of, after the conviction happened, these guys, they never talked publicly about it. We requested interviews. They just were kind of like, no, we're done. We're not talking about this anymore. I testified at trial, and that was it. And then the docuseries comes out, and the whole thing explodes, and people watch it on Netflix over the holiday in 2015, and they think, oh my gosh, these guys have been, this guy's been framed. So is his 16-year-old nephew. This is a travesty, and these cops are crooked. And people start emailing and calling Sergeant Colburn and Lieutenant Lank and inundating them with, you're scum, you're this, you're that, and you can imagine.
Now, the libel case here was brought by Sergeant Coburn,
Correct.
and what Sergeant Coburn is saying is that the people that made the documentaries uh, were not only unprofessional, but had basically falsely reported or characterized, described what he did or didn't do. And I found very interesting in reading the opinion of the judge here that his conclusion that there was enough evidence for a jury to find that material had been put illicitly by Sergeant Coburn. Uh, uh, Basically, I suppose you'd say to frame the defendant. What was your sense in listening to the testimony? I mean, you're not the judge in the case, but you were there, and I'm really interested in your reaction as you saw his testimony.
So I remember listening to it because in court, leading up to the trial, we had heard so much about Lieutenant Lank and Sergeant Colborn, and I especially, they were. I almost expected them to come in with like horns and a tail. They had been just cast as these evil villains by the defense team, and they come in, and Coburn's just kind of like he's got his gun and he's in his uniform and he's kind of awkward because he's got all this stuff on and he looks a little uncomfortable and he just seemed, I mean, to be honest with you, he seemed kind of dopey to me. And as I'm listening to the testimony, I remember we were in the media room down in the basement of the courthouse and we're all listening to this and we were all kind of like, okay, where's the big, oh, this guy that planted this evidence? I mean, where is it? Where's the proof that the evidence was planted? And it just seemed to fall flat as far as, oh, we've got this, big, you know, conspiracy to frame Steven Avery, and this is one
Mm.
of the main architects of it. And it just didn't feel like it when we were sitting there watching the testimony, which is
Mhm.
obviously condensed in a docuseries. We
Sure,
sat and
sure.
watched it live as it's happening with all the objections and sidebars and whatnot.
Now, it struck me is that the judge, Judge Ludwig, in his opinion, and a very serious and not just forthcoming but powerful opinion in the case, said that the jury could properly find, rationally find that as a matter of fact, that there had been this sort of hanky panky that was suggested here that material had been in fact uh, sort of falsely placed by Coburn for the purpose of getting a conviction. Uh, the judge then said that this is a libel case brought by a public official. A public official brings a libel case, and this is the law that uh, we've talked about on this broadcast often, that when a public official brings a libel case, not only has to show what was said about him was false, and the judge agreed that he had enough evidence on that, not just false, but that when the false claim was made about him, it was made knowingly, on purpose. That is to say, the people who made the documentaries knew that it was false, and what we call actual malice. And the judge's decision was there was no proof of knowledge on the part of the people that made the documentary of the falsity of this claim. Uh, I'm not asking you to second guess what Judge Ludwig said, but as an observer in the case, I am interested in your sense as to how it played out in the sense of a jury trying to decide if, in fact, material very much to the damage of a prospective defendant had been basically mistreated, treated in a way to get a conviction, and done that by the police. What was your sense as to the credibility of the police who testified?
It's hard because I feel like it was an unforced error on their part. There was no need for these people who are potential witnesses in this wrongful conviction lawsuit where the county is being sued, they were going to be deposed or had been deposed. And it just seemed to me to be an unforced error. And to me, it seemed silly that if you felt like you needed assistance in searching for evidence and you're looking for volunteers, why not tap the people with the State Department of Criminal Investigation who are there as co-investigators, co-lead investigators on the case? So I think that damaged their credibility in a sense, because I feel they should have known better. They shouldn't have been there. Your district attorney had already punted the case and said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to prosecute this case because of the lawsuit. So what on earth were you doing there? You shouldn't even have been there. So I thought that damaged their credibility. However, I did not see any big bombshells coming out of Colborn or Lank where I thought, oh my gosh, these guys did it. They took that vial of blood that the sheriff's office had or the clerk of courts had, and they smeared it on the key, or they had the key, they found the key and put it in Steven Avery's bedroom.
Right.
I just didn't get that sense that had happened. And obviously the jury didn't believe it because they found him guilty of the murder.
Right.
You would think
Right.
if they believed that the evidence was tainted or planted, that would be a crime, obviously.
Right.
So you would think that they would have then acquitted him because they would have thought that the evidence was fabricated.
Yeah. And that's also why it's so interesting that the finding of Judge Ludwig was that there was enough evidence, enough for a jury to find that in effect, Sergeant Colborn had been framed, falsely accused of placing this incriminating evidence there. But, and this is where the law comes in, but no evidence had been adduced, no evidence had been offered proving that they lied, that it was on purpose, a deliberate error, not just an error, a deliberate falsity by the people that put the documentary together. And so the final result then of the opinion, one could say, is that the judge vindicated the sergeant by saying there was plenty of evidence for the jury to find he had been falsely accused. But he loses the case because there was no evidence that the people who put the program together purposely said anything that was false about him. It's an interesting example of how much and to what degree the First Amendment has been imported into libel law as a protection of free speech and free press, even in circumstances in which, without some First Amendment angle, the libel suit would have been really quite different. I mean, this libel suit would have come out differently in England or in Canada or other democratic countries that don't have the level of legal protection for the press, which the people that put this together would be viewed as press. And it is a uniquely level of protection based again on the notion that it is so important that the public be able and the press be able to criticize the government, that the law would protect even false statements made by the public or the press in particular, even false statements in the service of protecting our living in a free society. So cases often have results which trouble us. If it was true, as the court intimated, that the sergeant hadn't done anything wrong, he still can't recover. That's the downside of providing all the protection that the First Amendment provides. The upside is the producers of these documentaries could go about their business secure in the knowledge, not that they could lie ever, but that they could speak out, have their view, offer their perspective without being concerned about having to cough up a lot of money. It's very, very interesting. Let me give you the last word today, because I'm so glad and so appreciative that you've been with us. Looking back on the trial and looking back on the journalism, so to speak, journalism or the creation of the documentary about the trial, what sense are you left with about how our society is functioning in cases such as this?
Well, so Steven Avery has always contended and maintained that he is innocent. His case has wound its way through the courts. He's basically exhausted all of his appeals. However, he can go back to the circuit court level, the trial court level, should he find something new, newly discovered evidence that he believes, or that the judge or the court will believe shows that he's entitled to a hearing on it. He still hasn't been given a hearing on any of the new information or so-called new information. It's really not new, that his current attorney has presented to the court. He hasn't even been given a hearing. So he's kind of still at that level, and he's still trying right now to get a hearing. As far as the journalism goes, things have changed even so much since the time of this trial. This homicide happened in 2005. The trial happened in 2007. It's hard to believe, but that's 16 years ago. It's a long time, and things have even changed since then. And we live in such a world driven by clicks and clickbait and headlines. And, I think these documentaries and docuseries are a really great way to give you a deeper understanding of a story and a case. Things like podcasts are as well. But I think there also comes with that some great responsibility to present things fairly and accurately. I think a lot was done in this series. This is a story that I always thought, when I covered it, even back then, was worth more than just covering in news stories. I thought it was a story with so many twists and turns that it was worthy of a book, or it was worthy of a documentary. But this documentary, it obviously took a position. It told the story through the lens of Steven Avery and through his claims. It explored it from the vantage point of he was wrong. That's what he was wronged. He was, the victim here. And that's basically the tack that the documentary took. They said they reached out to other parties to be involved, the victim's family, the state, and those people and those entities, those officials didn't want to be involved, and that's their prerogative. But when somebody gets up on the stand and you have some like eerie music and things like that, obviously casts the person as a villain, that's what the public is going to be left with. That's what their perception will be. And I'm not saying whether evidence was planted or not. The jury made that decision. But I think that you have to take great care to be as fair as you can while still presenting something that's informative and even entertaining.
Apropos what you've just said, I'm so appreciative to you for being here and doing it. I want to read 2 lines as we close from what Judge Ludwig said in his opinion, towards the end of his opinion. He said, if media could portray us only at our best, we would be a country of antiseptic caricatures and less intelligent for it. We have not spoken so low just yet. Thank you all very much. And to my co-host, thank you.